I used to think I was clever. Standing in our sterile apartment kitchen that Tuesday morning, scrolling through the comments on my latest Instagram post, I felt like I had cracked some secret code to modern marriage. The photo showed me and Callum from the office at yesterday's rooftop bar event, his arm casually draped around my shoulders as we laughed at something he'd whispered in my ear. The caption read, "When your work husband is more fun than your real husband, Orkshire marriage needs spice, Orkshire modern wife." 43 likes and counting. Sienna had commented with 3 fire emojis. My mother had written, "Live your best life, honey." Even some of my coworkers had chimed in with laughing faces and heart eyes. Grant sat at our kitchen island, methodically eating his oatmeal while reading something on his tablet. He hadn't said a word about the post, though I knew he'd seen it. His phone had buzzed with the notification when I uploaded it at midnight, and I'd watched his face in the blue glow of the screen. No reaction, just that same quiet, analytical expression he wore when debugging code at work. "You're being awfully quiet this morning," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot he'd made. Grant always made coffee. He did most things around here, actually, which was part of the problem. Where was the excitement, the spontaneity? "Just thinking," he replied without looking up. "About what?" "Work stuff." I rolled my eyes. Everything was work stuff with Grant. At 36, he'd settled into the kind of predictable routine that made me feel like I was suffocating. Up at 6, coffee, oatmeal, shower, work, home by 6:15, dinner, Netflix, bed by 10, rinse and repeat. Even our conversations had become algorithmic. "Did you see my post from last night?" I asked, settling onto the stool across from him. "I saw it." "And?" Grant finally looked up, his brown eyes studying my face with that same careful attention he gave his computer screens. "What do you want me to say, Lysandra?" "I don't know. Something. Anything. Maybe laugh. It was supposed to be funny." "Was it?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I felt my cheeks warm, but I forced a laugh. "God, you're impossible sometimes. It's called having a sense of humor about marriage." Sienna thought it was hilarious. I'm sure she did. There it was, that tone. Not angry, not hurt, just tired. It made me want to shake him, to get some kind of real reaction. When we'd gotten married 8 years ago, Grant used to get jealous. Not in a crazy way, but he'd pull me closer when other men looked at me, kiss me harder when we got home from parties where I'd been flirting. It made me feel wanted, desired, worth fighting for. Now he just ate his oatmeal. "You know what your problem is?" I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "You've gotten boring. When's the last time we did anything spontaneous? When's the last time you surprised me?" Grant set down his spoon with deliberate precision. "When's the last time you wanted to be surprised by me?" The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because the honest answer was that I'd stopped looking to Grant for excitement months ago, maybe longer. "That's not the point," I said finally. "Isn't it?" Before I could answer, our 7-year-old daughter Maisie bounded into the kitchen, her school backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She had Grant's thoughtful eyes and my stubborn chin, a combination that made her far too perceptive for her age. "Why do you and Daddy look mad?" she asked, climbing onto the stool next to Grant. "We're not mad, sweetheart," I said quickly. "We're just talking." "About what?" "Adult stuff," Grant said, ruffling her hair. "Did you brush your teeth?" "Yes." "Daddy, who's Uncle Callum?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" "Some kids at school were talking about Mommy's pictures on the computer. They said Uncle Callum looks like a movie star." Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. To anyone else, he'd look perfectly calm, but I'd been married to him long enough to recognize the signs. The way his shoulders squared, the slight pause before he spoke. "Uncle Callum is Mommy's friend from work," he said evenly. "Why don't I know him?" "Because he's not really your uncle, baby," I said, shooting Grant a warning look. It's just what some grown-ups call their friends. Maisie considered this with the seriousness she applied to all adult mysteries. Can I meet him? Maybe someday, I said, though the thought made my stomach twist in a way I didn't want to examine. Grant stood abruptly, rinsing his bowl in the sink. I'll drop Maisie at school today. I can do it, I protested. I don't have to be at the office until 9. It's fine. I want to talk to her teacher about the science fair project anyway. He was already moving, gathering Maisie's lunch from the counter, checking her backpack, going through the motions of being the responsible parent. The one who remembered science fair projects and parent-teacher conferences and dentist appointments. Ready, kiddo? He asked Maisie. Bye, Mummy. She hugged me quickly, then skipped toward the door with Grant. Grant, I called after him. He paused in the doorway, looking back at me with those careful, measuring eyes. We should talk later, I said. Should we? And then he was gone, leaving me alone in our too-quiet kitchen with my cooling coffee and the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted between us. I just wasn't sure what. I spent the rest of the morning getting ready for work, trying to shake off the strange mood that had settled over me. By the time I arrived at the marketing firm, where I worked as a coordinator, I'd almost convinced myself that Grant was just having one of his moods. He'd been working long hours lately on some big project, and stress always made him withdraw. The office was buzzing with its usual Tuesday energy. Open-plan workspace, glass-walled conference rooms, the constant hum of keyboards and coffee machines and whispered gossip. I'd been here for 6 years, long enough to know everyone's secrets and alliances, long enough to have carved out my own little sphere of influence. Lysandra, Callum's voice carried across the bullpen as I settled at my desk. He was walking toward me with that easy confidence that had first caught my attention 3 months ago when he'd transferred from the Chicago office. Tall, dark hair that looked effortlessly messy, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were in on some private joke. Morning, I said, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. Great post last night, very authentic. Authentic? You know, real, honest about how marriage actually works instead of all that perfect couple bullshit people usually post. I felt a warm flush of validation. This was what Grant didn't understand. Callum got it. He understood that marriage was complicated, that it was okay to acknowledge when things felt stale. My husband didn't think it was quite as funny, I admitted. Ah. Callum perched on the edge of my desk, close enough that I could smell his cologne. The boring one. I'd told him that in confidence weeks ago, during one of our long coffee breaks that had started as work discussions and gradually become something more personal. Grant is just so predictable, I'd said. Same routine every day, same conversations, same everything. I feel like I'm disappearing. He's not boring, I said now, though the defense felt automatic. He's just stable. Right, stable. Callum's smile was knowing. Well, if you ever want to do something unstable, you know where to find me. He was flirting. Openly. Obviously flirting. And I should have shut it down. Should have reminded him that I was married, that this was inappropriate, that I loved my husband even if things felt complicated right now. Instead, I smiled back. I'll keep that in mind. The day passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines and stolen moments. Callum and I grabbed lunch together, sitting in a corner booth at the cafe downstairs, while he told me stories about his travels before settling into corporate life. He'd been to Thailand, Morocco, Iceland, all these places that existed in my imagination as exotic fantasies, while I'd spent my 20s building a life in suburban predictability. You should travel more, he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. See the world before you're too old to enjoy it. I have a daughter, I reminded him, and a husband. You can't just disappear when you have responsibilities. Who says you have to disappear? Take a weekend. Take a week. Life's short, Lysandra. His thumb traced across my knuckles, and I didn't pull away. I should have. I knew I should have, but it felt so good to be touched like that, like I was someone worth pursuing instead of someone taken for granted. When I got home that evening, Grant was in the kitchen making dinner while Maisie did homework at the counter. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so utterly normal, that I felt a strange disconnect, like I was watching someone else's life through a window. "How was work?" Grant asked without looking up from the stir-fry he was preparing. "Fine, busy. How was yours?" "Fine." And that was it. The extent of our connection, our intimacy, reduced to single-word exchanges while he cooked, and I pretended to care about the mail he'd left on the counter. "Mummy," Maisie said, looking up from her math worksheet, "can we go to the playground this weekend?" "Sure, baby, we'll see. Can Uncle Callum come?" I felt Grant's attention sharpen, though he didn't turn around. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because Mommy talks about him a lot, and he looks fun in the pictures." Grant's knife stilled against the cutting board. In the silence that followed, I could hear the tick of our kitchen clock, the distant sound of traffic, my own heartbeat in my ears. "Uncle Callum is very busy," I said carefully. "He probably doesn't have time for playgrounds." "Oh." Maisie returned to her math, already moving on to the next thing with the resilience of childhood. But Grant had turned to face me now, and in his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, something colder and more frightening. Recognition. That night, after Maisie was asleep, I found Grant in the spare room that served as his home office. He was sitting at his desk, typing something on his laptop, surrounded by the organized chaos of his work. Technical manuals, notebooks filled with his careful handwriting, a whiteboard covered in diagrams I didn't understand. "What are you working on?" I asked from the doorway. "Just some documentation." "This late?" "It's important to keep good records," he said without looking at me. "You never know when you might need them." Something in his tone made me step closer. "Records of what?" Grant finally looked up, and I saw that careful, analytical expression again. Like he was studying a problem, breaking it down into component parts, figuring out the most efficient solution. "Everything," he said simply. And for the first time since this whole thing with Callum had started, I felt a flutter of real fear. The next morning, Grant was gone before I woke up. His side of the bed was cold, and when I went to the kitchen, I found a note propped against the coffee maker. "Took Maisie to school. Will be late tonight. Meeting with client. No, love you. No, have a good day." Just information, delivered with the same emotional distance he might use for a work email. I told myself I was being paranoid as I got ready for work. Grant had always been methodical, detail-oriented to a fault. It's what made him good at his job, debugging complex systems and finding solutions that others missed. But that same quality, which I'd once found reassuring, now felt ominous. At the office, I threw myself into work, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I had a presentation to prepare for a new client, a boutique hotel chain that wanted to rebrand their image to appeal to younger travelers. It was the kind of project I usually loved. Creative, challenging, with room for the kind of innovative thinking that made me feel valuable. But I couldn't concentrate. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected to see a text from Grant. Some acknowledgement of the tension between us, or maybe an apology for being so cold. Instead, I got nothing. "You seem distracted," Callum said, appearing at my desk around 10 with 2 coffee cups. "Rough night?" I accepted the coffee gratefully. "Just tired." "Want to talk about it?" I glanced around the office. Our coworkers were absorbed in their own tasks, but I was acutely aware of how this might look. Callum bringing me coffee, leaning against my desk with that concerned, intimate expression. "Not here," I said. "Conference room B is empty." I should have said no, should have insisted we keep things professional, especially after Maisie's innocent questions the night before. But the need to talk to someone who understood, someone who didn't make me feel like I was walking on eggshells, was overwhelming. Conference room B was glass-walled but soundproof, giving us privacy while maintaining the illusion of transparency. Callum closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. "So," he said, settling across from me. "What's going on?" "Grant's being weird. Weirder than usual, I mean." "Weird how?" "Cold, distant, like he's planning something." Callum raised an eyebrow. "Planning what?" "I don't know. That's what's making me crazy. He's always been quiet, but this is different. It's like he's calculating. Maybe he knows." The words hung between us like a challenge. Because there it was, the thing we'd been dancing around for weeks without ever saying out loud. The lunches that ran too long. The text messages that had nothing to do with work. The way we looked at each other across the office, like we were sharing secrets. "Knows what?" I asked, though my voice came out smaller than I'd intended. "Come on, Lysandra. We both know this isn't just friendship anymore." My heart hammered against my ribs. Nothing's happened. "Not yet." "Not ever," I said, but even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't true. Maybe nothing physical had happened, but emotionally, I'd been cheating on my husband for weeks. Callum leaned forward, his blue eyes serious. "Look, I'm not trying to complicate your life, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have feelings for you, and I think you feel the same way." I did. God help me, I did. Sitting there in that sterile conference room, looking at this man who made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible, I wanted to throw caution to the wind. Wanted to be the kind of woman who took risks, who chose passion over security. "It's complicated," I whispered. "It doesn't have to be. I have a daughter, a marriage. I can't just—" "I'm not asking you to run away with me," Callum said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I'm just asking you to be honest about what you want." What I wanted? When was the last time anyone had asked me that? When was the last time I'd even asked myself? "I want to feel like myself again," I admitted. "I want to remember what it's like to be excited about something. Someone. Then let's figure it out. Together." His thumb traced circles on my palm, and I felt something inside me shift. A door opening that I'd kept carefully locked for years. "Okay," I said. "Okay? Let's figure it out." Callum smiled, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We spent the rest of the week in a bubble of secret meetings and stolen moments. Coffee runs that stretched into hour-long walks. Text messages that made me smile at inappropriate moments. A lunch at a restaurant across town where no one from the office would see us, where Callum told me I was beautiful and I believed him. Nothing physical happened. I told myself that mattered, that as long as we kept things emotional, I wasn't really betraying Grant. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Every shared look, every private joke, every moment I chose Callum's company over my husband's was a small betrayal. Grant, meanwhile, had become a ghost in our own home. He left early, came home late, and when he was there, he spoke only when necessary. He was polite, efficient, present for Maisie, but absent in every way that mattered. It was like living with a roommate who happened to share my last name. "Is Daddy mad at you?" Maisie asked one evening while I helped her with her bath. "Why would you think that? He doesn't talk to you anymore. And he sleeps in the office room now." My stomach clenched. "He's just been working a lot, baby. Sometimes grown-ups need space to think." "About what?" "Boring adult stuff." Maisie considered this with her usual gravity. "I don't like it when you and Daddy don't talk." "We talk." "Not really. Not like before." Out of the mouths of babes, my 7-year-old could see what I'd been trying to ignore, that my marriage was dissolving in real time, and I was too caught up in my own drama to care. That night, I found Grant in his office again, hunched over his laptop, with the kind of focus he usually reserved for particularly complex coding problems. "We need to talk," I said. "Do we?" "Yes, this silent treatment is ridiculous. If you have something to say, just say it." Grant saved whatever he was working on and closed the laptop. When he turned to face me, his expression was neutral, professional. Like I was a client he was trying not to offend. "What would you like me to say, Lysandra?" "I don't know. Something. Anything. You've been acting like I don't exist for a week." "Have I?" "Yes, and it's affecting Maisie. She's asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About why you're sleeping in here, about why we don't talk anymore." "And what did you tell her?" "That you're working a lot." Grant nodded slowly. "That's partially true." "Partially?" "I have been working, just not on what you might think." Something in his tone made my skin prickle. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've been documenting things, patterns, inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies in what?" "Your behavior, your schedule, your stories about where you've been and who you've been with." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been paying attention, finally." "That's insane, Grant. You can't just—" "Can't what?" "Notice that my wife has been lying to me for weeks? That she's been having lunch with the same coworker every day? That she's been posting photos designed to humiliate me?" "I haven't been lying." "Where were you last Tuesday between 12 and 2? The question was so specific, so unexpected that I fumbled for an answer. Lunch. I told you I had lunch with Sienna." "Try again." "I did have lunch with Sienna." Grant opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. It showed a simple spreadsheet with dates, times, and locations. Last Tuesday's entry read, "L claims lunch with Sienna. Sienna posted Instagram story from her office at 12:30. L's car spotted at Riverside Cafe with unknown male." My mouth went dry. "You followed me?" "I didn't have to. You posted a photo of your food. The cafe's name was on the napkin." I stared at the screen, at the methodical documentation of my deception. There were dozens of entries, going back weeks. Every late night, every unexplained absence, every small lie I'd told, organized with the same precision Grant brought to his work. "This is crazy," I whispered. "Is it? Or is it just thorough? You can't build a case against your own wife like she's some kind of criminal." "Can't I?" The question hung between us, and for the first time, I understood what I was really looking at. Not just a list of my movements, but evidence. The kind of documentation someone might need if they were planning something bigger. "Grant," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what are you doing?" He closed the laptop and looked at me with those careful, analytical eyes. "I'm protecting myself, Lysandra. And our daughter." "From what?" "From whatever comes next." He stood up, brushing past me toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "I hope I'm wrong about all of this. I hope there's an explanation that doesn't involve you choosing someone else over our family." "There is," I said quickly. "Grant, I can explain." "Can you?" "Yes." He turned back to me then, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. Vulnerable, hopeful, willing to believe the best of me. "Then explain." I opened my mouth, ready to tell him everything. About Callum, about how lonely I'd been, about how I'd never meant for things to go so far. But looking at his face, at the careful hope he was trying so hard to hide, I couldn't do it. "We're just friends," I said instead. "Callum and I. We work together. We have lunch sometimes. That's all." The hope in Grant's eyes died so quickly I might have imagined it. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay? If that's your explanation, then okay." He left me standing in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his methodical documentation, and I knew with sick certainty that I'd just made the worst mistake of my life. By Friday, the atmosphere in our house had become toxic. Grant moved through our shared spaces like a polite stranger, speaking only when Maisie was present and maintaining a careful distance otherwise. I caught him watching me sometimes, not with anger or hurt, but with the same analytical focus he brought to debugging code. like I was a problem he was working to solve. The worst part was how normal he seemed around Maisie. Patient, attentive, fully present in a way that made me realize how checked out I'd become. While I was distracted by text messages from Callum, Grant was helping with homework, planning weekend activities, maintaining the stability that our daughter needed. "Mum," Maisie said over breakfast, "can you come to my school play next week?" "Of course, baby. When is it?" "Thursday at 7. I told you yesterday." I had no memory of this conversation. "Right, Thursday. I'll be there. Daddy's coming too, and maybe Uncle Callum." Grant's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "Uncle Callum?" "Mommy said he might come to the playground with us this weekend." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I never said that, Maisie." "Yes, you did. Yesterday when you were texting him." The silence that followed was deafening. Grant set down his mug with deliberate care, and when he looked at me, his expression was perfectly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd started yelling. "Lysandra," he said quietly, "could I speak with you privately?" "Grant, I can explain." "Privately." We went to his office, and he closed the door behind us. When he turned to face me, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, something colder. "How long?" he asked. "How long what? How long have you been lying to me?" "I haven't been—" "Our 7-year-old daughter knows more about your relationship with this man than I do. She's expecting him at family events. She calls him Uncle Callum, like he's part of our lives. It's not what you think." "What do I think, Lysandra?" I fumbled for words, for some explanation that would make this sound innocent. "We're friends. That's all. He's new in town, doesn't know many people. I was just being friendly. Friendly enough that our daughter expects him at the playground." She misunderstood. "Did she? Or are you planning to introduce your boyfriend to our child?" "He's not my boyfriend." The words came out too loud, too desperate. Grant studied my face with that same careful attention, and I felt like he could see right through me. "Show me your phone," he said. "What?" "Your phone. If you're just friends, show me your text messages with him." My stomach lurched. The messages weren't explicitly romantic, but they were intimate in ways that would be impossible to explain away. Inside jokes, complaints about my marriage, plans to meet that I'd kept secret from Grant. "I'm not showing you my phone. That's an invasion of privacy." "Privacy." Grant repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "When did we start having privacy from each other?" "When you started spying on me and building spreadsheets like some kind of stalker." "I started documenting your behavior because your behavior became worth documenting." "That's not normal, Grant. Healthy couples don't spy on each other. Healthy couples don't lie to each other either." He had me there, and we both knew it. I felt trapped, cornered, like every word I spoke was digging me deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. "I want you to stop seeing him," Grant said. "I can't. We work together. Outside of work, the lunches, the texting, whatever this is, I want it to stop. You can't control who I'm friends with. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to save our marriage. Our marriage was broken long before Callum came along." The words were out before I could stop them, hanging in the air between us like a confession. Grant's face didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "Was it?" he asked quietly. "You know it was. We've been going through the motions for months, maybe years. I thought we were building something, a life, a family. We were existing. There's a difference." Grant nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd suspected. "And Callum makes you feel alive again." It wasn't really a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." "I see." He turned away from me, looking out the window at our perfectly manicured suburban street. When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "Do you love him?" The question hit me like a physical blow, because the answer was complicated, messy, impossible to explain. Did I love Callum, or did I love the way he made me feel? The excitement, the validation, the sense that I was still someone worth pursuing. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Do you love me?" Another impossible question. I loved the Grant I'd married, the man who'd made me laugh and feel safe and chosen. But that man felt like a stranger now, replaced by this cold, analytical version who documented my movements like evidence. "I don't know that either." Grant turned back to me, and for the first time in weeks his composure cracked. Just for a moment, I saw the hurt he'd been hiding behind all that careful control. "Well," he said, "at least you're being honest now." That weekend, we were supposed to have dinner at Grant's mother's house. Ruth Tew had never particularly liked me. I was too outspoken, too modern, too different from the quiet, traditional wife she'd probably envisioned for her son. But she tolerated me for Grant's sake and adored Maisie. I considered making an excuse to skip dinner, but Grant made it clear that wasn't an option. "We're going," he said, "all of us, as a family." "Grant, I don't think—" "We're going, Lysandra." So we went, driving in silence while Maisie chatted about school from the back seat. Ruth lived in the same house where Grant had grown up, a tidy colonial with perfectly maintained gardens and family photos covering every surface. Grant's younger brother Jamie was there too, along with his girlfriend Sarah. The family resemblance between the brothers was strong. The same thoughtful eyes, the same careful way of speaking. But where Grant had always been gentle with me, Jamie had never bothered to hide his skepticism about our marriage. "Lysandra," Ruth said as we settled around the dining room table. "You look tired. Everything all right?" "Just busy with work." And how is work? Still enjoying it?" There was something in her tone that made me look up sharply. Ruth was watching me with the same analytical expression I'd been seeing on Grant's face lately. "It's fine. Challenging." "I'm sure it is. Grant mentioned you've been working late quite a bit." I glanced at Grant, but his face was neutral. "Some projects require longer hours." "Of course. And you have such dedicated colleagues. What was that young man's name? The one from the Chicago office?" My blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry." "Maisie was telling me about Uncle Callum. He sounds lovely." The table went silent except for the clink of silverware. Maisie, oblivious to the tension, smiled brightly. "He's really nice, Grandma Ruth. Mummy says he might come to the playground with us." "Does she now?" Ruth's voice was perfectly pleasant, but her eyes were cold as winter. I felt like a bug under a microscope, every movement being catalogued and analysed. "Maisie misunderstood," I said quickly. "Callum is just a coworker." "Just a coworker who might join family outings." "Mom," Grant said quietly, but Ruth waved him off. "I'm just trying to understand, dear. In my day, we didn't typically invite male colleagues to family events unless there was a particular reason." "Times change," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Indeed they do. Not always for the better." The judgment in her voice was unmistakable. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Who was she to sit there and pass judgment on my life? "Ruth," I said, "I think you're reading too much into an innocent friendship." "Am I?" "Grant, what do you think?" All eyes turned to Grant. He sat perfectly still for a moment, considering his words, with that same careful precision he brought to everything else. "I think," he said finally, "that Lysandra is right. Times have changed." It should have felt like support, but something in his tone made it sound like an indictment, like he was agreeing that modern marriage was somehow lesser, more disposable than what previous generations had built. "Well," Ruth said, "I suppose we all have to live with the choices we make." The rest of dinner passed in stilted conversation about safe topics, Maisie's school, Jamie's job, the weather. But the damage was done. I felt exposed, judged, like everyone at that table knew exactly what kind of person I was, and found me wanting. On the drive home, Maisie fell asleep in her car seat, leaving Grant and me alone with the silence that had become our default mode of communication. "That was humiliating," I said finally. Was it? Your mother basically accused me of having an affair in front of your entire family. Did she? I thought she just asked about your coworker. Don't play dumb, Grant. You know exactly what she was doing. What I know is that our 7-year-old daughter has been talking about another man so much that my mother noticed. What I know is that you've been lying to me for weeks. What I know is that you just told me you don't know if you love me anymore. His voice was quiet, controlled, but I could hear the pain underneath. I never meant for any of this to happen, I said, but it did happen, and now we have to decide what comes next. What do you mean? Grant pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, I could hear Maisie's soft breathing from the back seat. I mean, we can't keep pretending everything is fine, not for Maisie's sake and not for ours. So what are you saying? Grant looked at me with those careful, analytical eyes. I'm saying you need to decide what you want, Lysandra. Really decide, because I won't live like this anymore. Like what? Like a stranger in my own home. Like someone you're settling for while you figure out if you can do better. The words hit harder than any accusation or angry outburst could have, because they were true, and we both knew it. And if I can't decide, then I'll decide for both of us. He got out of the car and gently lifted Maisie from her car seat, carrying our sleeping daughter into the house, while I sat in the passenger seat, staring at our perfectly normal suburban home and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The following Monday brought an email that made my blood run cold. It was from HR marked confidential, with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Workplace conduct discussion, scheduled for Tuesday, 2:00 p.m. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the implications fully sank in. Someone had complained. Someone had noticed the lunches, the coffee breaks, the way Callum and I looked at each other across the office. Someone had reported us. Everything okay? Callum appeared at my desk, but for the first time in weeks, his presence didn't bring the usual flutter of excitement. Instead, I felt exposed, vulnerable, like everyone in the office was watching us. We need to talk, I said quietly. Not here. We met at the coffee shop across the street, sitting in a corner booth where we could speak without being overheard. Callum looked relaxed, confident, like he didn't have a care in the world. It occurred to me that he didn't. Not really. He was single, unattached, free to flirt and pursue and walk away whenever things got complicated. I wasn't. HR wants to see me, I said without preamble. About what? Take a guess. Callum's expression shifted, becoming more serious. Someone complained. Apparently. Do you know who? Does it matter? The point is, people have noticed. This thing between us, it's not as subtle as we thought. Callum reached across the table to take my hand, but I pulled away. The gesture that had felt exciting a week ago now felt dangerous, reckless. Hey, he said softly. It's going to be okay. We haven't done anything wrong. Haven't we? We're friends. We have lunch together. There's nothing inappropriate about that. You know it's more than friendship. But we haven't acted on it. We haven't crossed any lines. I wanted to believe him, wanted to convince myself that emotional infidelity was somehow less damaging than the physical kind. But looking at his handsome, unconcerned face, I realized how naive that was. My daughter calls you Uncle Callum, I said. My husband's family thinks I'm having an affair. My marriage is falling apart. How is that not crossing lines? Callum was quiet for a moment, studying my face with an expression I couldn't read. Are you having second thoughts? I'm having reality thoughts. This isn't some romantic comedy where everything works out perfectly. I have a life, Callum, responsibilities, a family. A family that makes you miserable. Sometimes, but it's still my family. And what about what makes you happy? What about what you deserve? There it was again, that seductive idea that I deserved more, that I was entitled to excitement and passion, and all the things my marriage had stopped providing. It was the same argument I'd been making to myself for weeks, the justification that had allowed me to rationalize every secret meeting and hidden text. But sitting there, facing the reality of HR investigations and family dinners, where I was treated like a pariah, the argument felt hollow. "I don't know what I deserve," I said honestly, "but I know I can't keep living like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm two different people, the wife and mother at home, and whoever I am with you." Callum leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that might have been disappointment, or maybe just inconvenience. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to step back, be more careful, keep things professional." "Professional?" He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that really what you want?" The honest answer was no. What I wanted was to feel the way I felt when I was with him. Alive, desired, free from the weight of suburban expectations and marital routine. But what I wanted, and what I could handle, were two very different things. "It's what I need," I said. Callum nodded slowly, but his expression had already shifted. The warmth, the intimacy, the sense that I was special, it all disappeared behind a polite, professional mask. "Of course," he said. "I understand." But I could tell he didn't. And more than that, I could tell he was already moving on, already writing me off as another married woman who'd gotten cold feet when things became real. The HR meeting the next day was every bit as humiliating as I'd expected. Margaret Chen, the head of human resources, was professional but stern as she outlined the complaints that had been filed. "Multiple employees have expressed concern about your conduct with Mr. Rees," she said, consulting a file that seemed impossibly thick for what I'd convinced myself was subtle flirtation. "Extended personal conversations during work hours, frequent off-site meetings that don't appear to be work-related, and social media posts that some have deemed inappropriate for colleagues." "We're friends," I said, the words sounding weak even to my own ears. "I'm sure you are. But the appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging as actual impropriety, particularly when it affects workplace morale and productivity." She showed me printouts of my Instagram posts, the photos with Callum, the captions about work husbands and marriage needing spice. Seeing them laid out like evidence made me realize how they must have looked to my colleagues, to my actual husband. "I understand this is a difficult situation," Margaret continued, "but I need you to understand that this behavior cannot continue. Any further complaints will result in formal disciplinary action." I left the meeting feeling like I'd been stripped naked in front of the entire office. Everyone knew. Everyone was watching, judging, gossiping about the married woman who'd been flirting with the new guy from Chicago. When I got home that evening, I found Grant in the kitchen, making dinner with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. Maisie was at the counter doing homework, and the scene was so perfectly normal that I felt like an intruder in my own life. "How was work?" Grant asked without looking up. "Fine. Just fine." I looked at him sharply, but his expression was neutral. Still, something in his tone suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "Yes. Fine. Good. I'm glad to hear it." We ate dinner in relative silence, with only Maisie's chatter about school filling the space between us. After she went to bed, I found Grant in his office again, working on his laptop with that same focused intensity. "We need to talk," I said. "Do we?" "Yes." "About this morning." "About everything." Grant shut his laptop and finally looked at me. I begged to fix our marriage, swearing I wanted our family. He asked one question that exposed everything. "What about Callum?" I promised I'd stop seeing him, but Grant turned the screen toward me. Jamie had seen us at a cafe, my hand in Callum's for a heartbeat I couldn't undo. My excuses sounded like bargains. Grant's voice didn't rise. It flattened into certainty. "You don't protect our marriage anymore. You negotiate against it." Then he asked to see my phone. I refused. He didn't argue. He just stood, resigned, and said we were done pretending. Grant's side of the bed was empty, and the note on the counter was colder than any fight, staying at Jamie's, picking up Maisie. I called in sick and drifted through the house, hearing how loud his absence was. My mother told me he was controlling, and for a moment, I let the validation soothe me, until Sienna asked the question I wouldn't answer, not physical, but emotional. Days turned into logistical texts, polite and dead. Then an email arrived from a law firm, custody and property. An unknown number warned I'd be served at 9:30, at work. I begged Grant not to do it, but I already knew. This wasn't a bluff. Friday at 9:30, a process server walked straight to my desk and handed me a thick envelope, divorce petition, temporary custody orders, and an evidence packet that made my stomach drop. I cried in the bathroom, then saw Callum waiting like he belonged there, offering comfort that felt like salt. Back at my desk, Grant's documentation was ruthless. Photos, receipts, calendars, printed texts, even his mother's letter questioning my fitness as a caregiver. By the time I got home, Grant was already packing Maisie's things under the authority of the order. When our daughter asked if it was because of Uncle Callum, I finally understood. I hadn't just risked love, I'd traded stability for a fantasy.